Here he is, Mr. Hersh Rephun. An interesting last name, I might add. Rephun, where does that come from?
It's of German origin originally, and it was originally Rebhun, Rebhun, which means partridge in German. And when my family came over at Ellis Island, there was no equivalent to a BH sound. So they changed the name to a PH sound and said, well, there's a PH sound. And so it was changed to Rephun, although because it's so hard to pronounce, people would pronounce it Rephun, Rephun. And so my dad really liked the closest representation, which was Rephun, and kind of drilled it into us and really stood by it. But it just is one of those things. People don't hear it enough.
Yeah.
If it were a really common last name, it wouldn't matter about the PH. People would learn, that's a silent H and it's a for accent on the E, and it's Rephun.
Well, you can claim to be one of the original members of the Partridge family, at least the German side of it. And
we did do that. We were the German Partridges. We were trying to do a show, but the network was, but to them it wasn't so funny.
Yes. So, but you did bear striking resemblance to a mature Danny Bonaduce. Just say.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, as you can see by our little bit of banter going back and forth, both Hersh and myself have significant backgrounds in comedy, various styles of comedy. And we talked about this ad nauseum on your podcast, the Yes Brand podcast, which is newly released. I mean, you did your first 5 episodes premiere like a week ago?
Yeah, so Thursday, December 1st, we launched the first 5 episodes. They're now on all platforms, Apple, Spotify, Google, all that stuff. And on Pantheon.fm, which is the hub of my shows and many, many other great shows. So yeah, you can find a Yes Brand there, and my Truth Tastes Funny podcast, which is my other show.
Well, very cool, because as you know, both of us share the same love and passion for podcasts, because it's been such a tremendous stage for people who have the similar styles like you and I, which is what I would call the live performance style. Podcasting is fantastic for that. The only thing that might be a little bit better, stuff like Clubhouse, but I'll be honest, I don't waste any time on Clubhouse because the shelf life of it is not worth the amount of time that I would have to spend on it. You do a podcast and it goes up on a shelf and people can pull it down every single day, any place, wherever they are around the world. And it has this tremendous sticking power. I've still got people reaching back 4 years to my original podcast of the NONFICTION Brand podcast. And so I'm continuing to get great value out of it. Is your experience with podcasts similar or different?
No, I love it for the same reasons. I love the fact that it's a kind of part of a series, even if the conversation isn't always, we're not serialized, but at the same time, I love the fact that people can just scan through all of the different episodes. On Truth Tastes Funny, for example, we just launched the 41st episode, and people can just go in and look at, and I can do that with other people's podcasts. I can come to it late, and just become a fan. And more people are sticking with it, keeping their podcast going. As you know, DP, it takes a lot of time and effort to sustain a podcast, but it's a great platform, and people are coming to it for a reason.
Yeah, that's very true. I'm reminded of a quote from one of my recent guests who said, you should always look for something that is so fitting or aligned with who you are as a person, it's almost effortless. Well, there's a lot of effort that it takes to do a podcast if it's not your personal style. But for me, and we talked about this on your podcast, I'm a writer who doesn't like to write. I mean, I'd rather do a podcast and spend 4 hours editing a 1-hour podcast, or I don't even know why. It's probably the love of the performance aspect of it, but also the technical aspect. Believe it or not, it's kind of fun to have to problem solve a podcast. Like, ooh, there's some weird noise there. I wonder how I can get rid of it. Can I EQ it out? Yeah, I find that interesting. Whereas I find blog writing, not my cup of tea.
Okay, that I'll give you. That I was just telling one of my daughters, we were talking about writing, and I was saying that when I was trying to do blog articles, because I was the writer on the team, of partners at this marketing agency, and we were just launching, and I was the writer, and it was like, okay, you're the creative, you do all the blog articles, and I'm like, I don't want to do I don't want to do blog articles talking about what we do and all that. I will write about our work. I'll write about things that interest me, but I don't want to do articles just for SEO and all that. I really resisted it. Doing something you don't like can be really painful.
Yeah, well, I got to applaud you for your instinct there. What you said that I heard was, I had no interest in it. Well, guess what? You were thinking like an audience member, which is, am I interested in this, or do I have no interest? It wasn't, well, this will score well with the SEO lords of, Cobalt. Yeah. It was more, it's not going to be interesting to an audience member. And I get into fights with clients and individuals about that all the time, which is, yeah, we're saying what you want told, but it's not what the audience wants to understand or wants to engage with, or will be emotionally and intellectually triggered to actually engage with in a meaningful way. And I got to tell you, audience members are more important than clients every time when it comes to what you need to communicate, especially when you're trying to build a brand. Because brands love to say, but I tell you, it takes the culture to actually do what the brands say. And if your company culture doesn't have the ability to fulfill the brand's talk by doing the walk, you're misaligned. So how does this relate to the core premise of the Nonfiction Brand podcast? Well, it's all about small business branding and personal branding, because if you ask me, personal brands are small businesses and vice versa. There's no difference. If you have under 50 employees, that business is based on your human DNA, and you better communicate like that. Now, I know you, based on everything I've seen you do, you agree with that wholeheartedly. And I can tell that because the whole Yes brand kind of tentpole that you've got set up now for a lot of your activity, for those people who didn't take improv class ever in their life, anybody who does know what Yes and is, looks at your Yes brand idea and go, oh, I get it. Very smart idea. So very quickly, from your point of view, what does the improv technique term Yes and
to my approach of what I do, or you want me to explain what it means in the traditional form?
Answer it as you would like.
Answer as you would like. Okay, so the rule in improv is that we accept the offer that the scene partner or other improviser is giving us. We don't want them to say, Martians landed in the front lawn, and we say no, they didn't, because that's the end of the scene. We have to say yes, and they were wearing Prada suits. That's the kind of, we're accepting their offer and we're building on it. And it keeps a very bouncy, positive flow going in any kind of imaginative, scene that you're creating. So with Yes Brand, the notion is that, first of all, there's a connection to comedy, but I'm not specifically or limited to being a comedy creative. So the stuff that I do doesn't have to be funny. It can just as easily be very emotional or heartfelt. The situation and the message call for, a certain type of genre. So it's not that it's only comedy, but I have learned that I react to stuff, to clients, to their situation, to their view of themselves. And my reaction is the and. So Yes Brand would be, I want the brand's message to be a reflection of what they brought to the party and what I saw and added to.
Yeah, that makes total sense, because one of the things that I'm sure you've run across in your career is the idea that creatives at ad agencies, marketing firms of all sorts, they go to a client, they talk to that client, and they start talking about the client's goals and wishes and desires and all that stuff. And if you're a creative like me, you're going, I understand that. And what you say you want is not necessarily the same thing as what I think you need. Consequently, I'm going to validate everything you've said. I'm going to use that information as the kind of foundation for everything moving forward, but I'm going to add to it. I'm going to give you my best work, because again, anybody who's listened to this podcast more than 5 times has heard me say, just like Walt Disney and the whole plussing system at Disney, where I make it as good as it can be. I give it to you. You take that and you plus it. You make it even better. You yes and it. And it keeps getting better and better and better and better and better and better. And anybody who loves going to Pixar films knows exactly what I'm talking about, because my children are all older now, but I was around long enough with them to have to watch Monsters, Inc. over and over and over again, and Finding Nemo over and over and over again. And normally as a parent, you'd go, oh my God, my brain's going to drip out of my ears, except there's always something in the frame that you didn't see the first 15 times that you saw it. And you discover it the 15th time and you laugh your head off, because they are rewarding repeat viewers with great stuff that was built by that yes and plus stuff.
Yeah, very good point. Very good point, because my kids range in age. And so I've had to see generations. Like I had to go back through The Lion King again with the younger kids, go back through all the other films, Monsters, Inc. included. And I appreciate the effort the filmmakers made to really create things that the parents can appreciate, so that we don't have to sleep through the same thing 20 times. Sleeping through it, even the best movie, is part of being a parent. But, I slept through Frozen the first time, but I also slept through Born Supremacy with my kids. So if you can sleep through that, I think that, you can sleep through anything. But the stuff that's in those movies, Inside Out is another one that I watched, over and over with my youngest daughter. Zootopia, all these films that really have something special. The Toy Story films, of course, and that makes our experience much richer, because they're adding upon adding and exactly as you described.
Yeah. Well, and if you think about it, if you were a fly on the wall in that producer room when they're talking about what their next animated feature is going to be, it could be, hey, we need another kid-oriented feature. Let's gear it toward 8 to 13. That might be stretching it to 13, but still, there are a lot of 13-year-olds who still love this type of stuff. And so let's really, really focus on that. And they go, yeah, 8 to 13, great. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then they say, and that's where we'll start, but we'll plus it so that we can bring in the young teens. We'll plus it even more to bring in the young adults. We'll plus it even more to bring in grandma and grandpa who actually love watching it with the kids. And what they do is they create not something that's a throwaway, watch it once. It becomes intergenerational in its appeal and engagement. That is what I mean by paying attention not to what you want to say or sell, but what the audience wants to engage and buy. And so I love your approach to it. And I want to talk specifically about your specific personal brand, because Hersh Rephun, interesting last name, got to explain it every single time you're out there. But guess what? That's part of your brand. You have to explain it every time you're out there in a way that people remember you, because frankly, it's one of the things that makes you kind of a little bit more interesting than John Smith.
Yeah. Why I didn't change my name to John Smith. Well, also, there aren't so many Hershes that that I'm forced to always say the last name. That's kind of a nice thing, in that Hersh Rephun is better than John Rephun, because with the name like John Rephun, I would always have to say what my last name is. And there is a John, which is another fascinating thing. He does not appear to be related to me at all, and can't remember where he lives. I corresponded with him. I came across him through LinkedIn, actually, and somehow have the same name, and it's bizarre. But there, he has to explain it every single time, and whatever his story is. And with Hersh, I can kind of sometimes just be known as Hersh.
Exactly. If someone says, "Hey, I was talking to Hersh," they aren't going to say which Hersh.
Right.
And that's frankly why I go by DP. Again, listeners to this podcast will recognize the fact that DP stands for David and Paul, or Dark Prince, depending on my mood. And which is part of the ongoing
Dark
joke.
Prince Knudten.
Yeah, well, exactly. I always tell that joke because it's memorable. And like any good stand-up comedian, you have to tell it like it's the first time you're telling it in order to get the joke to really land correctly. So yeah, is it a little bit of a conceit? Sure. Is there a reason for it? Absolutely. I was going to work at DP Knudten in Chicago, and the creative group I was in got a phone call from the secretary there saying, hey, we're getting business cards for you. What would you like on them? I said, how about my name, David Knudten?
Yeah.
And they said, a little bit of problem there. You're going into a creative group with 4 other Davids. So you might want to go with something else, or we'll give you a nickname. So I said, no. I'll pick DP. And it's now stuck. It's my kind of professional stage name, if you will. And I have a love-hate relationship with it because it's a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It's. I'm not going to say it's inauthentic because it is authentically me, especially in a business professional setting. But if my wife ever called me DP, I would probably have we'd be in counseling for that because, I feel like it's a different level of intimacy or lack thereof. Not that I don't think listeners of this audience, I appreciate you greatly. You can call me DP every day of the week and I'll love you for it. So don't get me wrong, but just understand that the desire to have a unique name can sometimes grate on the person you are, but can really be helpful to you professionally.
Well, this is a subject that I have spent way too much time thinking about because number one, when I was a kid, and my full name is Herschel, my middle name is David. So Hersh David is my full first and middle name. And I didn't like Herschel and ruled it out altogether as a kid. And my sisters would call me Heshy. My parents might call me Heshy Hesh. So Hesh became the name that I went by among all my friends and family. And I used it to the exclusion of ever really using Herschel. Teacher might call me Herschel, but I didn't like Herschel or Hersh. I didn't like any of that. And my mom would say, you could use HD Rephun. If you become a writer, HD Rephun would be a cool. I didn't want that either. So as I entered the business world, Hersh Rephun was on my business cards. Hesh was I even got in trouble with the IRS because I had my accountant was filing my taxes as Hesh. And then I finally was like, my real name is Herschel, right? And he's like, oh my God, I don't even know how they've been taking it all these years. It was like, there's no social security number associated with that. But it was so ingrained. Then when I started doing stand-up comedy again, about 10 years ago, I had come back to it after a pretty long hiatus of just working in advertising. I went by Hersh because none of the MCs could figure out Hesh. As you probably know, MCs are the least interested in who they're bringing up, and they really don't want to struggle with it. So, they're going to accept your first answer or whatever is easiest. So Hesh, for some reason, even though it sounds like it's spelled like it sounds, Hesh, pretty simple, they couldn't get it. I said Hersh, and Hersh they did get. Like Hersh just made sense. Hersh, they could Hersh. I never asked for it. I never gave them my last name. I never used it. It was just Hersh. And that stuck. And I started preferring it. Now, same thing with my wife. My wife calls me Hesh. And my wife introduces me as Hesh no matter what. I'll have rules. Oh, for when we're meeting parents from the school, you want to introduce me as Hesh. It's fine as long as I'm not going to do business with them. If I'm going to do business with them, it should be Hersh. And if it's anybody that has any kind of formal connection to me, it should be Hersh. And I want them to say Hersh. But that's too much to ask a spouse. They don't give a shit about that stuff. Well, pardon my French.
No, you're fine. They get to call you whatever they want.
They call you what they want. And she will sometimes say Hersh or Herschel, but that will be for a specific use. That will be to kind of have fun with the idea of, or like my parents did, and possibly yours as well. When you do something wrong, your full name comes out. Your full name is used as though they're telling the government and everybody around you, this has been a very bad boy. And we're announcing Herschel David. Herschel David is bad enough. Herschel David Rephun would be even more. I don't know what I would have done to be Herschel David Rephun. Herschel David Rephun, get in here now.
Yeah. Oh, believe me, David Paul was the worst it got for me. I guess to try to underline this conversation and make some sense of it is naming's really important, no matter what your brand is, whether you're trying to build your personal brand or your product brand. And one of the old sayings that I had drilled into me as a young copywriter was, the minute you're tired of your advertising, great. they're finally starting to see it. So you don't willy-nilly change stuff. In fact, if you're a big brand like Coca-Cola, you don't change anything at all if you can possibly help it, because a pillar of your branding is actually the authenticity of that brand, going all the way back to 1886. If all of a sudden they decided, well, they actually tried. They tried to come out with New Coke. Remember New Coke?
New Coke, yeah.
And what did the market do? It forced them to come back to the old Coke because they didn't want anything new. I like to call Coke grandma. Everybody loves grandma.
Yeah.
She's sweet, but a little acidic. And no one messes with grandma. If you have that type of brand relationship where people say, you don't mess with the brand, wow, you're actually getting way past the neofrontal cortex of the brain and getting all the way back to the brain stem when it comes to emotional feelings and stuff like that. So let me ask you, Hersh, you are doing stand-up. You are working in advertising and marketing. Describe the Venn diagram. You got that circle that is stand-up. You got that circle that is advertising and marketing. How much overlap of those two circles is there? Or is your sweetest of sweet spots in that intersection between the two?
Yes, my sweetest of sweet spots is really that cross-section, that intersection. And that was another reason why I kind of decided to build up the Yes brand, because I wanted the connection to comedy at the very least to be completely innate and be part of my DNA. And I wanted the branding and the humor to coexist really comfortably. And so I did it for a long time with the stand-up. I was like, okay, well, one helps the other. It's a facet of my personality. I don't get out and do stand-up in a boardroom and it's, whatever, but it's good. It rounds me out. Well, I was kidding myself because the fact is who I am is an amalgam of things that I like to do, and the branding and messaging and copywriting and storytelling, brand storytelling is all stuff that I have done for my entire adult life and that I do well, I believe. So it's so much a part of me. I needed to conform my environment to recognize that instead of trying to maintain two different environments. An environment in which I'm a creative and a brand storyteller and a brand strategist, and an environment in which I'm an entertainer.
That's interesting because there's been a lot of HR people especially talk about the desire to have a business culture where everybody brings their whole selves to work. It sounds like that's what you're trying to do and doing successfully from what I can tell, that you don't say, oh, I'm going to leave my comedy hat at home. It's actually one that you wear every day and use judiciously. I mean, come on, let's face it. If you're presenting, well, let me just speak from my personal experience. One of the things I always told younger members of my team on presentation day, where we're coming in to show new concepts or campaigns, whatever, I always said, you have to understand, this is the best day of their week. They've been staring at spreadsheets. They've been dealing with manufacturing issues. They've been doing stuff in the, in the parking lot because it needs resurfacing. All this crap they've had to deal with. And now the circus comes to town. They get to see exciting new ideas, some of which scare them, but intrigue them. So we had better present these things in a way that entertains them as well as intellectually engages them. And by the way, if you always entertain when you show up, you're never going to be in a review because the client is going to go, we love those guys. Why would we get rid of them? The only time you really lose them as a client is when a new marketing director comes in and brings in their favorite circus performers.
Yeah. And the idea of being, the trained monkey thing, the performing monkey, be funny, so many people, so many comedians or personalities take umbrage at that, like that's an insult. It really isn't. Just is that comedy, as you started saying when we began this conversation, improvised stuff is immediate. We don't know whether it's going to be funny. We don't know how funny. We don't know why. It's happening in the moment. That's where the best comedy happens. To bring somebody in and say, oh, he's going to be funny for you. She's going to amuse you and entertain you is just kind of looking for disappointment. But I don't take offense to it because it means that they're wanting that, as you say. They're really starving for that entertainment, that joke, that lightness. So just keep that in mind. I'll tell myself or others in my field, just keep in mind that they want that. They really need that. And it's not an insult to be told that you're entertaining.
And by the way, entertainment can include tragedy and drama and everything else. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite things ever in the history of television was the fact that John Hamm as Don Draper in Mad Men gave me something that whenever anybody said, so what do you do in advertising? I said, have you seen the Carousel episode of Mad Men where he introduces the Kodak Carousel projector? Go onto YouTube. I'm telling you, Nonfiction Brand listeners, if you've never seen it, go onto YouTube, type in Mad Men, the Carousel, and then watch that scene. That is the quintessence of what I mean by entertainment. Entertainment can be tragic, Hamlet, or it can be hilarious, like pick your favorite stand-up comedian. It's a continuum. And as a performer, you need to be able to play all those different colors. Maybe you're better at some than others, but you need to have the range and the breadth of capabilities to do all that stuff. So again, Mad Men, the Carousel with John Hamm as Don Draper, doing what creative directors do best, excite clients by entertaining them. And they may be laughing, they may be crying, doesn't matter. You got past their no brain and got to their, oh my God, I love it part of the brain.
Yeah. There isn't a, we sometimes, our audiences sometimes marvel at the sight of a comedian being a really gifted dramatic actor. That's not surprising to me in most cases. We love to affect people. We want them to react and feel and get chills and have all those reactions. Laughter is so specific. Laughter is that's a very specific reaction if you think about it, because someone could be touched or someone could be charmed or someone could be warmed by a scene or something like that. When you're on a stage and you're doing stand-up, there's only one real goal. You want to elicit that laughter. And if you're doing a sitcom or something, you need to set up and punch, or do dry humor. And you're doing something a little more Bob Newharty, and you're still reeling them in, and the goal is still laughter. But I remember at a young age loving MASH, the show MASH, because to me, it captured everything about performing and writing that you could want. It could be funny, it could be hysterically funny, it could be madcap, it could be ridiculous. But the circumstances in which they said it allowed it to be so heartbreaking and so palpable, just the emotion that was there as a result of the reality they created around themselves.
Well, and that reality, even though it was based on fiction, became so real because the audience wanted to accept the stories that they were being told. And as long as they felt real. Do you want Crapper John who's drunk operating on you? No, probably not. But we all know, he's a surgeon, but he drinks. But we're not going to worry about that too much. Klinger, always wearing a dress, trying to get a Section 8 out of Korea, never worked. So why is he still wearing a dress in season 4? Doesn't matter. It's part of Klinger and who he is. And, all those characters, you learn to love them because you recognize the truth of who they are as characters. And what you can expect of them. And because they always deliver that, you build affinity. And one of the things that brands do very, very well is build affinity. I was talking about that today with one of my colleagues saying, and we work in a nonprofit, we often focus only on donors, especially high dollar donors. Our favorite donors are the ones that the ex-wives of rich industrialists who want to give away millions of dollars. Well, that's great. There aren't that many of them. And if you're going out for whale, you have to array your assets and resources to go whale hunting. That doesn't mean we should ignore everybody else, especially younger people. We want to build affinity between them and our nonprofit. Why? They don't have any money now. In 5 years, they might have a little bit. In 10 years, they might have more. In 15 years, they probably do have significant dollars that they could invest. And by the time that they're in the later stages of their life, they're like, I want to give it to you rather than my wastrel son who won't even call me on my birthday. Creating affinity between yourself and your audiences is incredibly important. And that's something comics do every time. Because let's face it, if a comic can't build affinity with an audience, they aren't going to be on stage very long.
Unless they're Andy Kaufman. Then they can build enmity and some kind of controversy and still. But the fact is that when people can do that, it's a testament really to their immense likability, that they can be jerks or push that button and the audience will go with them, either out of fascination, strange compulsion, or whatever it is. But the affinity is still there, even in those situations. So when people talk about hate comics, insult comics, stuff, the ones that are really, really good are still trading in affinity. It's people loving somebody talking like that and getting away with it. People busting everybody's chops, equally. Equal opportunity offenders, that kind of thing.
Those of us old enough will remember I think, quintessential insult comic, Don Rickles. And he was so good. He had every politician, TV, radio, movie star, whoever lining up to be insulted by him because he was so good and so likable. There's
likable.
There's another British comic who's got a tremendously odd laugh. I can't remember his name, but he's the same thing where he will open up his audience and say, okay, now everybody heckle. Anybody who wants heckle, because he's a master heckle handler. He can, and people go out of their way to insult the way he looks, and he slaps back hard, and everybody loves it because they know the game, which is, I'm going to say something, he's going to say something worse, and we're all going to laugh our heads off. But again, that could not happen. Yeah, that's right.
Jimmy Carr. Yeah, Jimmy Carr wears a suit and that's right. And that's a great example because he is really not trying to be likable, and he doesn't even seem like he would be likable. But I have the suspicion that in life he is likable, and that's maybe part of the mystique, is that when you want people to like you, like when you want to like somebody and you want them to be likable, you're fascinated with them and you stay with them and you kind of hold that place for them, because he's playing like stadium sized crowds and just saying the worst things to them. I mean, Anthony Jeselnik is another with a very dark wit, and it's coming. You just don't know exactly how. He's going to say something really dark, and he's going to go somewhere really, really unpleasant, and he's okay with that. But when it comes to brands, I think some brands want very desperately to do that in some way because they recognize that it brings you closer, to them. If they can just take you to the edge and you can go to the edge together, then that brand may have that affinity in a way that, and it has to be the right fit. It has guys like us, people like us who are working in this field. We're supposed to understand the temperature of that.
Funny you bring that up because we're recording this on Monday, December 5th of 2022. And right now, let's say the ad world is focused on, as of last week into this week, a certain scandal with a huge fashion brand, Balenciaga, which I can never say correctly, but let's just say they did an ad campaign.
It was very close. You did very close. It's Balenciaga.
Well,
Balenciaga.
For those who aren't paying attention, they did an ad campaign that featured children in these they seemed like realistic home settings or room settings, but the sets were very involved with a lot of stuff all over the place, props and things like that. And like there was a little girl holding a teddy bear. The teddy bear looked like it was wearing bondage gear. And then if you looked really closely at some of the papers surrounding them, it was referencing child pornography or something like that, like legislation about child pornography. So it was, as a creative director, I know exactly what happened. What happened was clients said, we need to maintain our edge in the fashion world. So we are giving you a little bit of rope to go a little bit further and take us right to the edge, but not beyond. Ad agency says, got it. And what they did was they took their edgiest people and put it on it. And those edgy people didn't have an adult in the room to say, whoa, 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 wait, that's one step beyond. And instead, they went one step beyond, and it blew up in their face hugely. And that's the danger of not having an adult in the room, which is why sometimes I look at creative departments that is staffed with nothing but 20-year-olds and go, oh my God, you guys are in such trouble. You just don't know it yet. You're going to run into something really, really bad really soon because you don't have the database of knowledge to understand that. No, that's a no-fly zone. You can't, no, don't touch that. That's a live wire. That's a third rail. Don't touch that. But anyway, that's an example of what you're talking about. I want to go back to talking about comics because every single comic, stand-up comic, is a personal brand. If I say certain comics names, you're going to instantly say something about them. Like one of my favorites, Michelle Wolf. Michelle Wolf can be credited with destroying the National Correspondents' Dinner. Yeah, she went on. She told the truth in her own kind of one step beyond way, and absolutely blew that what was called the geek prom of Washington, blew it apart. I love her for stuff like that, but your mileage may vary. Meanwhile, you get someone like Jim Gaffigan, he's kind of America's big lovable dad bod, who will tell you funny stories about his kids and eating and Hot Pocket and all that stuff. and you are delighted by it because, again, you know exactly who he is. Then you talk to another one of my favorite comics, Bill Burr, who you think you can peg him where he is politically, and then you'll find out, no, I was totally wrong, because he's always, is he a natural contrarian? No, he's not always contrarian, but he's always interesting. And again, your mileage may vary. You may be disgusted by him.
Yeah.
That's okay. But if you take a look at those three names, Michelle Wolf, Jim Gaffigan, and Bill Burr, you've got totally different people doing the exact same thing. And yet in completely different ways. So yes, personal brands are important, especially when it comes to allowing people to decide which comedy show they're going to.
With each of the ones that you mentioned, great examples, by the way, of these comedian brands, each one of them is themselves. You know, Bill Burr, how he honed his style was all about discovering that he should just be himself and not try to write stuff, not try to contrive anything, just talk to the audience like he's talking to his friends. And that's what he does. And the same way that friend of yours that just doesn't censor himself or herself, you know, can get themselves in trouble, that's what Bill does. And if he gets in a little trouble, so what? And how serious is everything anyway? We're taking ourselves too seriously anyway. And, you know, Michelle Wolf at some point made a decision that she was going to say what she thought, and she was going to call out the humor and hypocrisy and whatever else she might see in it. And she was going to do that no matter what the cost. Then Jim Gaffigan is that you have a a bond with him, it seems. Like, you know that the kind of humor he's going to deliver is going to be so consistent that you're not going to really question it. So if he takes the audience on a little bit of a ride, you're in such good hands with Jim Gaffigan. You know, you're like, and there are other comics in his category who are also great with that. Like, you know, Brian Regan is one where they have these really vast audiences, really deep audiences, really loyal audiences for 20, 30 years. And those people are coming to see them and coming back to see them because of the comfort and affinity that they have and the trust, the bond that exists with those people. I think the trust is harder for brands to earn than attention. Like the Balenciaga thing is a good example. It is baffling. I was thinking while you were talking about it, I was thinking that they might say, Balenciaga might say, well, you don't understand. You missed the whole point was that we were shooting in the valley and we had only a certain amount of budget for the house. And the house was used previously for another shoot. It was a different kind of shoot. And somebody left a teddy bear and we said, pick up the teddy bear. We don't know whether it's a budget. It's a budget, and it's like, well, there's no good way to talk your way out of that scenario. But
yeah, other than to say, hey, we took a mighty swing at the ball. We missed it. We apologize profusely. We understand where you're coming from. However, our brand will always be on the edge of your side. And if you can't deal with that, don't buy us. Because one of the things brands can do and do all the time is it's almost like based on who you are or your sensibility or even your budget, you can't afford us. Or you shouldn't afford us because that's the way we are. One of the examples I use all the time in my presentations is NFL football teams. Again, playing the same game, same equipment, slightly different colored uniforms, everything's the same. And yet, if you pick a team like the Dallas Cowboys and compare them with the Las Vegas Raiders, or I know them as the Oakland Raiders, they'll always be Oakland in my mind. And ask which one is the smash mouth football team versus the fancy kind of marquee team. Well, you'd say, well, Oakland, smash mouth, Dallas Cowboys, marquee. Yeah, they are that. Yeah, and this is a story that I actually looked up. I was so intrigued by it. Why are the Dallas Cowboys known as America's team? Turns out, and bear with me as I do my best NFL voiceover guy. On the frozen tundra of Lambeau Field, the rise of new gladiators came about under the tutelage of Vince Lombardi. Those NFL films, well, back in like the late 80s, they were coming out with one film per team. And the title of the film for the Dallas Cowboys was America's Team. I am convinced the Dallas Cowboys marketing team said, oh, that's good. We're owning that. And they took it and they ran with it. And now they still are America's Team, even though they aren't America's team in Wisconsin. Let me tell you that much.
Right. And who's America's team depends on what state you're in.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, I wanted to ask you because without going terribly deep into your background, you go on LinkedIn and you're from Los Angeles, but knowing where you are now, you're in Iowa City, Iowa?
Iowa City,
yeah. And so I just have to ask you this. You've been in both places. We're all American. Is there a brand-related difference to the people who live in Iowa City versus Los Angeles?
A brand-related difference? Yes. Yeah, there is.
So how would you describe those brands?
Yeah. I would say that the Midwestern brand, and I wouldn't, Iowa City, I wouldn't single out, especially because Iowa City itself is a college town. So that's like a Big Ten town in a lot of ways. But because we're dealing with Iowa, we're dealing with the Midwest, it still holds true. It's a down-to-earth brand. It's an earthy brand. It's a practical, facts in front of my face brand. And it's not what we've come to look at as aspirational. It's not an aspirational brand. And when I moved here, really for family, be closer to family, my wife's family, I was still working, and I continue to work remotely and traveling and with my office in Los Angeles. So I dipped my toe only slightly into the advertising world in the Midwest, but I did very quickly learn that was a different brand. The LA brand is very aesthetically motivated, very aspirational, very wanting to make dreams come true. And in the Midwest, that brand is dreams are great, but you got to get up in the morning. Dreams are fantastic, but you got to get up in the morning and drive that tractor. that's what Iowa kind of says to me. And I appreciate it, having spent several years here, and I kind of appreciate the reality check of it, because I think it was a lot of pressure being in that Los Angeles dream factory.
Yeah, oh boy, I tell you, that's I think I agree 100% with your assessment of both. Having lived in Hollywood literally for a solid year, that was a long year, let me tell you. But that's because it was not for me. That doesn't mean it's not for you. That's the thing about a brand. No true brand is for everybody all the time. A true brand knows who they're best for, plays hard to serve those people that they're best for, and is okay with saying, you know what, maybe we're not the right fit for you. So anyway, what a great conversation with a fascinating person. I want to let audience members know about your podcast. So why don't you walk through your podcast, where people can find them and how they can engage with you on social media?
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you. See, I just felt like saying thank you, David.
Well, you should, because we are now far more intimate.
We are. Well, thank you, David, for having me on the show. So the Yes Brand podcast, people can find at yesbrandmethod.com. And then the Truth Tastes Funny podcast can be found at truthtastesfunny.com. And then all of the players and all the things that are ways to enjoy the podcast, YouTube and everything else, everything's on there. So those two websites, and of course my site, HershRephun.com, which is on the screen there, is always a good window into what I'm doing. And yeah, that's the best way to get in touch with me is through the website, through the HershRephun.com website. There's a contact page. And I'm just really excited to be doing all these things kind of under this one umbrella of me. It's not that everything falls under Yes Brand. There's people hire me to do different things that don't require the Yes Brand name or label. It's really about me being me, and that's really it. That's the simplest thing, and that's the dream, I think, in some ways. Yeah, well, it's so true. Just if you can create a personal brand that is you being you, absolutely true, or what I like to say, completely true, completely you, you're on the right track. Well, thanks everybody for listening to this episode of the Nonfiction Brand podcast. As always, I would love for you guys to all like, subscribe, refer, and review this podcast, because believe it or not, those reviews actually do help other people find it. And frankly, that's it for this week. And I am your host, as always, DP Knudten, and he is Hersh Rephun. And I'll be talking at you all again next week. Bye-bye.